So we are in the course of discussing the wants argument, and we saw that if the word want is interpreted fairly narrowly, so that the feeling of duty or obligation doesn't count as a want, and what we mean by want is more something like lust or greed or thirst or hunger, some sort of fundamentally body sensory based motivation, then the first premise was false. It's not always the case that you do what you most want to do, because you don't always do what is sort of you're most motivated to do by sensation in the body. You often have act in other ways. So the question then is, okay, can we interpret want in a way that is going to make the first premise true? And that's what we're going to look at in this video. So maybe we're going to use the word want in a way that the feeling of duty does count as a want. So what is the sense of want under which the feeling of duty would count as a want? Well, probably just this, that wanting something, it's any motivation to produce that. It doesn't depend upon where the motivation comes from. It doesn't depend upon how pleasure is involved. When we say you want to do something, when you want something to happen, what we mean just is you're motivated to make it happen. How motivated? Who knows? Maybe you never will act on that motivation, but you at least have the motivation to make it happen. And so then the feeling of duty would be a want. When you feel that something is your duty, you're motivated to do it. You may not do it because you have competing motivations, but you have some motivation to do the thing. Okay, well, premise 1 seems true on this sense of want. Premise 1 says you always do what you want to do, and if want just means motivated, then we're saying you always do what you're motivated to do, and that seems correct. What exactly the motivation is, it's unclear, but if you're doing it, you're motivated to do it. So you'll always do what you're motivated to do? Yeah. This seems true. So what about premise 2 then? Does premise 2 come out true on this sense of want? Well, premise 2 says you always most want to do what you believe is in your self-interest. So what do you believe is in your self-interest? That's what you have the most motivation to do. So here it is. You are always most motivated to do what? Whatever you believe is in your self-interest. So let's ask if that's true. Well, we can distinguish between two aspects or facts about a motivation. One is who is the person that's motivated, who has the motivation. So is it me or you that has the lust or the hunger or the greed or the thirst or the feeling of duty? And then what is the object of the motivation? What are we motivated to do or to get or to make or to have or whatever? So I'm motivated to keep a promise. I'm motivated to eat a cookie, right? Those are the different objects of motivation. So all of my motivations are mine, because I'm the one that's having them. But if premise 2 is true, then it's also the case that all the objects of my motivation, what my motivations are about, what their motivations for, what their motivations to do, those all involve me as well. Right? Premise 2 says what I'm most motivated to do is whatever I think is in my self-interest, and so it's my self-interest is always going to pop up as an object of motivation. Well, that's an interesting claim. Once we draw this distinction once we recognize it, between who is it that has the motivation and what is the motivation for, well, why is it the case that the person who is motivated, that they always show up in what they're motivated, in the object of the motivation, what it is that they're motivated to bring about? Let's consider an example. Just go back to our example to keep a promise. So I made a promise to you. I'm going to keep my promise to you. Why? Well, maybe it's because I don't want you and others to be angry at me. And maybe I want people to trust me. So if that's my motivation, then my motivation does fundamentally concern me and does concern my self-interest. But do I have to have that motivation? And can that be the only motivation I have? Maybe I feel obligated to keep my promise to you out of respect for you. So I have the motivation. I feel obligated in this case, and in that sense it's my motivation. But the object of my motivation is respect, safety, trust, the other person that you enjoy. So there it looks like the person who has the motivation and the person who that the motivation is about or concerns are different. My concern is for you. So the object, in this case, does not look like it's my self-interest. It's the interest of others. It's the interest of you or, whoever. So this looks like a straightforward counterexample to premise 2. once we draw this distinction, we say, well, no, look, my motivations can concern other people, but premise 2 says they always have to concern myself. Why do they have to concern myself? There's no reason, no argument, and it doesn't look like it's true. At least we haven't seen the argument yet. So if this is correct, then we can summarize what we've said about the wants argument like this. So in that leftmost row, we have the two premises of the wants argument. We have premise 1, you always do what you most want to do, and premise 2, you always most want to do whatever you believe is in your own self-interest. And then across the top, we have the two ways of understanding what a want is. That wants are body and sensation-based, or that wants are all motivations. So if we interpret wants as body and sensation-based, and if we ask, do you always do what you most want to do? Then the answer is no, we appear to act on non-body-based motivations all the time. Is premise 2 true if we understand wants as body or sensation-based? It might not be, but it doesn't matter because the first premise is false. And so if that's how we're interpreting want, the argument isn't sound, it doesn't matter about the second premise. So we said, okay, in this video we looked at a different way of interpreting want that makes the first premise come out true. When we say that a want is any motivation, and if we ask, do you always do what you most want to do? What that's saying is you always do what you're most motivated to do. That seems like that's probably true. But then when we're thinking of want in that way and we turn to the second premise, we say, and we ask the following. Is it the case that you always are most motivated to do what you believe is in your own self-interest? That doesn't seem right. It seems like we have some motivations that are targeted at others, and so the second premise seems false. So however we interpret the word want, one of the two premises looks like it's going to come out false, and maybe there's some other way of interpreting the word want that would make both the premises come out true, but it's not obvious what that other way of interpreting the word want is. So if this is correct, there's no way that you can interpret the word want to make both of the premises true at the same time. The problem for the descriptive egoist seems to be this. When we look at these feelings of moral obligation or duty, they're motivations, they don't seem to be body or sense-based, and they're about somebody besides the agent, about somebody besides whoever has the motivation. And it looks like these are going to make at least one of the two premises false. If we interpret want narrowly, these don't count as wants, and then the first premise is false. If we interpret want broadly, then these do count as wants, and then the second premise is false. So however we understand the word want, these feelings of moral obligation are going to make one of the two premises false. Or so it seems. The descriptive egoist is not going to roll over at this argument. What the descriptive egoist wants to do is going to say, okay, actually, no, I'm going to go with the broad interpretation of want. A want is any motivation, and so you do always do what you most want to do because you always do what you're most motivated to do, but it's going to turn out that premise 2 is correct. Why is this? So premise 2 says all of your motivations concern yourself because you always are motivated to do whatever you think is in your own self-interest. So what I and what Rachel's in the article you read say, of course you have motivations concerning other people. And what the descriptive egoist is going to say is, well, actually no. Actually, all of your most fundamental motivations concern yourself. And insofar as your motivations concern other people, it's because they derive from self-interest. So consider a different example. You don't have any fundamental motivation to go to the dentist or to see the doctor. It's not very pleasant. You have to pay money. It takes time. But you do it. Why? Because it's going to benefit you. Because it's going to get you other things that you do want. And what the descriptive egoist wants to say is, okay, it looks like you have motivations that concern other people, but your most fundamental motivations concern only yourself. And insofar as your motivations concern other people, that's because they derive from your most fundamental self-interested motivations. So we're going to see the descriptive egoist begin to make that argument in the next video. We won't see the end of that argument until the next unit because the argument that they're making is going to bleed over into ethical egoism in ways that we'll see when we get there.